Welcome to the C Word, the Conservatives podcast. Today we're talking about conservation on a budget. I'm Jenny Mathiasson, an objects conservator based in South Yorkshire.
And I'm Kloe Rumsey, an objects conservator based in Greater Manchester.
Welcome to season 6, everyone!
Welcome!
Yeah! You may notice that Christina isn't in this episode. She has recorded a little message for us that we'll play a bit later. You will hear her in this season, don't you worry.
Yeah, she's still around.
Yeah, absolutely. And she'll be doing interviews and all sorts. So she's not in this episode, so instead we have a special guest host.
Who do we have?
Yeah.
I'm Lorraine Finch, and I'm a conservator of archives.
Yay!
Woo-hoo!
Hi!
Hi!
So yes, we've had a bit of a break over summer, and I was just wondering what kind of news we've seen floating about. Now, this is recorded at the very start of September, and it's not being released until, well, when you're listening to this, folks. So these news might not be super fresh, but have we seen anything during the summer or anything that we've thought, oh, we really must mention that? Because I've seen one thing.
What's your thing?
I just love this amazing fight that happened on all over Twitter in the museum world about the proposed new definition of museums.
Oh man, that totally passed me by.
Oh, it really kicked off. It was beautiful to behold. So it seems like ICOM, so with an M, not an N, they've been working on some various new definitions, and they're trying to crowdsource them, and someone drafted something that was kind of put forward as a new proposal. So it's not adopted yet, but people hated this. I cannot describe how much people hated this definition. I've printed it out so that I can start reading it.
It's really long.
It's 2 paragraphs, which is quite long for a definition. This is how it goes. Museums are democratizing inclusive and polyphonic spaces for critical dialogue between the pasts and the futures. Acknowledging and addressing the conflicts and challenges of the present, they hold artifacts and specimens in trust for society, safeguard diverse memories for future generations, and guarantee equal rights and equal access to heritage for all people. Museums are not for profit. They are participatory and transparent, and work in active partnership with and for diverse communities to collect, preserve, research, interpret, exhibit, and enhance understandings of the world, aiming to contribute to human dignity and social justice, global equality, and planetary well-being. So that's 2 paragraphs.
It's catchy.
It takes a while. I actually like all the things it's trying to say.
Yeah.
I'm totally on board with all of the things it's trying to do. What is a museum? Well, let me get my notepad. Like, that's kind of not where this needed to go, I think. And I think that's... people were reacting because it was very lengthy, because it was a very lofty language.
That's my comment for it.
It was written for museum directors, not for people who need to know what a museum is. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So I think there was a slight disconnect there in terms of who this definition is for and who it's useful for. Like, this is a lovely 2 paragraphs of things that we should...
It's the start of an article, isn't it?
It is. Actually, it's the start of a book that's written by academics and is predominantly for academics and people who have an MPhil in museum studies.
Yeah.
That's the level we're at, and I think that's what really, really annoyed people. And that's fair.
I love that the 4th word is inclusive, and then
and yet the
6th word is polyphonic, and I was like, wait, what's that mean? This is the least inclusive definition.
Yes. So I think that there were some strong feelings, and Twitter really kicked off about it.
Yeah.
Social media had a field day. People did not like this. Like I said, I'm on board with what it's trying to express, but we need to express it in like 6 words.
Yeah.
I was going to say, there's been a really interesting discussion about this on the Museums Association, and in their most recent newsletter, there was a quote that somebody had sent into them, and it's anonymised, and it states, "Is there a single buzzword that's been omitted from this totally meaningless garbage?"
Ooh.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, straight it is to the point.
Yeah. Not holding back.
Like I say, there were some very strong feelings around this definition, and from what I understand, the most recent step is that they held back in having the vote. They've suspended the date of the vote, and they're going to revisit the definition and alter it.
Yes. Like I said, I think it is trying to say something positive and nice and trying to really...
Yeah, but it's trying to say it all.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the
detail.
problem. Yes. And yeah, it is very buzzwordy.
I have some news about something else that's kicked off in the recent weeks.
Go on.
So let me make sure I've got the correct union. Prospect has been supporting the Science Museum Group in a strike for fair pay, essentially, in a nutshell.
It made national headlines.
It did, which is very exciting because museum pay is one of those things that we all need to talk about.
Yes.
And I was really appreciative of the fact that it's from such a huge museum group, such a huge museum, such a famous museum, and such a good one as well.
Yeah.
Well regarded. And basically people have suffered a real wage decrease whilst the higher ups, not mentioning positions or names or anything, have had bonuses that are larger in some cases than people's actual yearly wage.
Yeah, there was a really interesting illustration of someone had a flagpole where they'd put two bits of tape. One was the wage they were being paid at the Science Museum. One was the actual living wage. By the way, they weren't being paid that. And then the top of the flagpole was in fact the, shall I say, top brass kind of pay before bonuses. So that it was a great visual representation, and there have been some fantastic placards that I hope people are collecting and saving because that is some top-notch stuff. Great puns,
Donating
people.
to museums.
Really,
wink, wink.
really good puns. I just really enjoyed everything about this. And obviously we feel very strongly about pay.
It's plain to see, etc.
Oh, it was so good. We're not asking for the moon, etc., etc. Totally on board with that. So happy to see it. So glad that it got so much traction. People have been signing the petition. People have been tweeting in support. And I saw some really great things from visitors on social media saying we didn't want to cross their picket lines. So we went to some of the neighbouring museums and we're going to come back another day because we support these people and they should be paid properly, which was really nice to see from just members of the public, just people out with their kids, that's such a good sentiment. And I thought it was really interesting that the surrounding museums do pay the living wage, and it's just that the Science Museum Group doesn't. So there was a certain amount of comparison going on and that sort of thing.
And this is in London as well, so it's one of those particularly hot topics of
absolutely
living in London.
Absolutely. So really great to see that. Super duper good. And I saw some great tweets from the people who actually work at the Science Museum Group, because there were great tweets about people saying how much they love their job, but this is important, etc. So I just think that it came across as a really good protest. In that it was no, we love what we do. It's not about that, but we don't do it for love. That doesn't pay the rent.
If it did.
It was a really good natured and oddly positive kind of strike. I think it was really good.
I'm really pleased to hear that.
I hope
there
were
were
good
people
outcomes.
who wouldn't go into the museum because of it. Because with funding, external funding bodies and all of the goals and stuff of museums tends to centre around visitor numbers as a huge deal. And if industrial action can affect that directly, then that will really punch hard.
Right. Well, I think that's probably all for the news.
Oh! Apart from our dear Jane, our darling dear Jane, she is now Professor Jane Henderson.
Yes.
Woo!
Yay!
Excellent job, Jane. Well done. So today we're going to talk a bit about conservation on a budget. Maybe to set the context here, conservation budgets. Some people have loads, some people have literally nothing. I've worked in all sorts of organizations, and some have masses of money. No one ever questions if it's I'm just going to order tons of phosphate and we're just going to make our mannequins and stuff like that. No one even bats an eyelid. As for the complete opposite.
You try and buy a roll of Tyvek and people are do you need it?
Not even that. Hello, may I please spend £5 on scalpel blades?
Really?
Absolutely. There are definitely those places.
Jesus.
The budgets exist, but sometimes those budgets are very small and sometimes almost non-existent, and sometimes it's a case of employees trying to discourage people from spending the budgets that they have, so there's a certain amount of permission asking and stuff like that.
See.
So you have to go a certain amount of rungs above you and ask politely, "Sir, may I please order some acid-free tissue?" That sort of thing, right? So there are all sorts of working arrangements out there and all sorts of budget types. And I think
eyebrows were going.
We can all guess which one I'm currently in. So I try to make as much happen on as little as possible. So that means I shop around, and
You're amazing.
sometimes I outright bend the rules and, buy something off eBay. We're not really allowed to do that, by the way. There are loads of reasons to be thrifty, and even if you've got a good budget, sometimes there's, good reason that you want to make that budget last longer and see that money go further. So today I think we're just going to have a little chat about ways in which we are thrifty, ways in which we can make our money last longer, and how we can do more with less, but not necessarily less quality, just...
Without making too many compromises on our professional practice.
Yeah, exactly. So
I think it's also an interesting point to think about people who are freelance, because taking what you were saying earlier about shopping around and being thrifty, when it's the money that you're earning, you tend to look, I think, more deeply and more clearly at what you are spending.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's true of like smaller private practice studios in general, like not just if you're a freelancer on your own, but even if you're a small studio, you just don't necessarily have the amount of cash sloshing about that a large institution might. So hopefully this episode will offer a little bit for everyone, I hope.
Well, yes, I mean, if you're looking at something like buying a £6,000 worth piece of equipment for a job that's lasting 6 weeks and that you're not going to use again, you are obviously going to look very carefully at how you might be able to work around not buying that piece of equipment but still do the work properly.
I'd like to think there are very few treatments that can only be achieved with a £6,000.
Well, me too. Yeah.
Well, yes. Whilst true. I mean, but sometimes equipment can be surprisingly expensive. Like if you look at some of the catalogs out there for like some of the big suppliers, then it can be a pretty hefty sum of money for even something like a light meter or like something like that. So actually, sometimes it comes with a price tag. And sometimes that's just a bit too rich. So let's talk equipment. What kinds of things can you do? I mean, I'm a big fan of borrowing from other people, if at all possible. Sometimes that does not work out because people need their equipment, or because they no longer have the equipment, or they don't think it's up to snuff, or there's an expectation that you then have to pay to hire it. So it depends on what kind of situation you're in. I probably wouldn't be okay to hire equipment. Borrow is fine. Hire, which comes with a cost, would be more of a problem.
What do you think? Your employer probably wouldn't like that either. If like, well, what are we getting out of it?
I'd love to think that there was a way around that. I lived on a very small cul-de-sac many years ago of 8 houses, and each house had a set of ladders, lawnmower, screwdrivers, all the rest of it. And instead of having 6 lawnmowers and 6 this and 6 that, or 8 of this and 8 of that, it would have been much better if we could have had one communal lawnmower that was lent out around the street. And I'd love to think that there was a way that we could do that as a conservation community, to say, I have a fume cupboard, or I have a this, or I have a that. Here's a list of what we have, when you can borrow it, how it's available. I'm sure there's a way of doing it.
I think that would be so nice. That is actually what I do with my neighbour. He has hedge trimmers and I have a lawnmower, and we swap.
Oh, yeah.
No, as an aside. So, Lorraine, you're a bit of an expert on this sort of thing, aren't you? And I understand you've got an event coming up.
I have, yes, with Museums Development East Midlands on the 10th of October. It started off being called Conservation on a Shoestring, but it's expanded more now to being Collections Care on a Shoestring. And it's at Rutland County Museum in Oakham, and it's completely free.
Yay!
Brilliant.
Love a free thing.
And you will be covering in that probably some of the things you'll be talking about today.
Yes, I started with just a few nuggets of ideas, and now I have enough to do a 2-day, probably longer course, which I'm going to condense down and do it in a 1-day workshop, which is very interactive, because I always like people to get up and do stuff rather than sit and be talked at.
Learn by doing.
Yeah, that's the best.
Yep.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, we'll try and get you to compress it further from a 2-day to a 1-day to a
to a half hour.
Because one of the things you're talking about with the equipment is I was doing, this is where this whole thing came from with the Collections Care on a Shoestring, is I was delivering a course on dealing with mould. And one of the things that puts people off on dealing with mould is they look at it and they just hold up their hands in horror and think about the expense of dealing with a mould outbreak.
Yeah,
and so we were talking about equipment, and you can hire equipment from a conservation supplier, and I wish more conservation suppliers would hire their equipment out, so you don't have to buy a £6,000 piece of equipment. You can hire it for a week or 2 weeks or however long you like you need it for. So it was 2 museums that were participating in this course. They both had a mould outbreak. They realised that if they shared the hire of this piece of equipment, which is £300, they could both use it a week each. And it would end up costing them £150.
Wow.
Much more manageable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is really good. I mean, it's funny that we don't do it more, really, because I'm thinking of things that I naturally think of as things that we hire. Freezers. Mm-hmm. Like, if there's like a pest outbreak, freezers is a thing that we hire. Why is that not true of more things, really? I love the idea that we should have some sort of communal centre, like, where things can go and, like, be deployed when they're needed, that sort of thing.
I suppose it depends on space as well, doesn't it?
Of course,
because if you need a chest freezer for a month or two, but you actually don't really have space for a chest freezer, you're more likely to think, I'll
that's
get
true.
one, rather than, go, okay, well, I'll save up my budget and get one.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, because, equipment comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes, don't they? But I was thinking, this is already something that is sometimes applicable to things like emergency salvage kits, because whilst every museum is likely to have a small kit, like there are certain regions that have a more extensive kit that people kind of subscribe to. So it's kept by a museum with some spare space, and people basically subscribe monetarily for the upkeep and all that. And they can then use that kit, have someone come fetch it when they need it. So
that's nice.
That's already a thing.
Lovely idea, yeah.
Yeah, so there's already a thing for things like rapid response stuff. So I think it can be done with conservation equipment and stuff like that. And probably it's much more likely to have to be a regional hub kind of thing. So maybe that's something to talk about with your like local maybe museum development network, that sort of thing, and consider if anywhere would have the space for it and what the logistics could be, and also what kind of money would be needed, etc. But I think there's projects in there. Like that sounds like something we can solve, people. Like it does. I think that sounds like completely solvable.
Yeah, and it also fits with all the discussions we're having around sustainability.
Yeah.
And maybe one way of sweetening the pill to your employer is to say, well, they're hitting workplace recycling and reuse targets and sustainability.
Ooh, yeah. My museum has been in conversations recently with the local museums, as in the others in Manchester. Yeah. For not quite that, but for sort of training and storage kind of conversations. Not early days yet, but I don't see why we wouldn't then go, hey guys, do you have a wet clean bath table or whatever?
No, it's a really interesting idea. I feel like more and more museums are having conversations about shared storage and stuff like that, when there's like a new development in the plans and that sort of thing. Yeah. So I feel like maybe that can be something that can be tacked on, like, and there should be a certain amount of space for equipment hire and that sort of thing. Like, I just think that there's something in this. Yeah. We can make this happen, people. Like, come on.
What do you think are the first steps then, Lorraine? If you're imagine you're in your studio and you need some things, what do those things tend to be that you start thinking of saving on?
The first thing is to look at your costs. I had a discussion with a gent who used to work for one of the big conservation suppliers, and when he went to visit conservation studios, would always say to the conservators, have a look at your invoices and see what you're spending the most money on. And horrifically, the thing that they are spending the most money on is delivery.
Oh, what? I can definitely understand that. It's insane.
Yes. And so that's the first place to start, is actually look at what you're spending and what you're spending it on. Another institution that I visited had 3 different institutions in one building. They would all order separately from the conservation suppliers. So that's 3 sets of costs. And that happens in one institution. Maybe the curator orders something, the conservator orders something, the volunteer coordinator orders something, and they all come separately. And delivery is huge. I mean, £35 plus VAT, which if you're not a charity, you can't claim your VAT back.
Ouch, yeah.
And we're talking about actual material and equipment deliveries, don't we? Not anything hyper specialist like art handling or anything like that.
No. So if you want some scalpel blades or some brushes, if you order them from a conservation supplier, I think the smallest cost is £9 for delivery. So £9 plus VAT. Yeah. On a box of scalpel blades. So that's where you need...
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's where to start, is what's costing you what.
So something that my museum has a fairly healthy conservation budget because they because they rely on us to raise funds to the museum, basically. And, silk crepline isn't cheap. And given that, though, we still try and, as you were saying earlier, make that money go further. Because, for example, by really being careful, last year we were able to get a plan chest because we were really careful and squeezed an extra thing in there, essentially. So we do buy on Amazon quite a lot.
Yeah.
But I'm, personally ethically unhappy with Amazon because of all of the reasons and the pay and the working conditions and blah blah blah, but the postage is so cheap and you can get a box of gloves for delivered to you for nothing.
I mean, yeah, so obviously here we wrestle slightly with our conscience as well, because I'm a big fan of getting stuff off eBay sometimes. And sometimes I do that out of my own pocket because I basically can't be reimbursed for stuff that we get off eBay because we're not supposed to use eBay. So the rule is only use the approved suppliers. Now, the approved suppliers are not approved by things that we would like to, like work ethics or the fact that they pay their staff or that they don't use child labor. Those are not the things that we actually choose as suppliers on. It seems to be some sort of, I don't know, there's some sort of vetting involved, probably just that they were willing to send us information in a format that could be processed in the correct way. They filled out the form, they could be bothered with that, and somehow they are now a recognized supplier, and we're not really allowed to shop around or buy our gloves from the cheaper supplier, which is also approved, but no, because we have to use these guys. I don't know. There's like all this sort of weird bureaucracy going on, and people are approved for reasons that are beyond my comprehension. It's certainly not for cheapness or efficiency or indeed labor or labor practices. But yeah, so sorry, the rant is real. But yeah, so I mean, obviously, it's not good that I am buying cheap things from China because the working conditions there are horrific, and also the carbon footprint on stuff being shipped over from China is horrendous. But it is also the way that I get a lot of my stuff. So, I mean, I realise that I'm part of the problem here. I am also part of the consumer society here. And
if we recognise, though, that that's because it's affordable and that's because they make it affordable to be competitive, then...
this is a global economy problem, I suppose.
This is capitalism, guys.
I suppose that is true.
I was going to say, one of the ways around the delivery costs from the suppliers that we generally use is that, they're going to hate me for saying this, they all allow you to go and pick stuff up.
Oh. I mean, that's totally not an option for me. However, I get that that's an option for a lot of people, actually. So, actually, that's a fair point.
Isn't Pell based in...
It's in Norfolk, yeah.
Norfolk is like the least accessible place in the world.
I've been to all of the conservation suppliers and that in person and picked up materials and equipment.
Oh, I love that you do road trips.
For reasons.
That's interesting.
I love it.
I would suggest that you ask them first rather than just turn up on the
Yeah, sure.
I'm here for my things.
That could be a little bit startling, I agree.
And the other thing is joint delivery. Okay, so I know if you're working in an institution and you're one museum and there's another museum 20 miles down the road and you've both got different accounting systems, then they're not necessarily going to allow you to amalgamate a delivery. But if you're in the same institution and your curator's ordered something and you've ordered something and somebody else has ordered something and they've all come from one of the major suppliers or a supplier, why don't you just put that all together in one order? Yeah. Not 3 sets of delivery costs you're paying.
This isn't really a step towards money saving in an official sense, but my institution has a list. We're the list? We're a very small, collections department of 3 plus archives, but we just write the things that we want from various suppliers on a list, and when we got certain numbers of things on a list, we purchased them.
See, I do that for me, but then I can't do it with the other people because we all have different budget pots, so we can't order something together because they come out of different pots, which is a great frustration to my life. Can you not ask them to invoice separately and deliver together? Why? No, because I've tried. To be fair, I think the problem is with our purchasing system and not with the supplier. Right. So I think if it was a world where I could do this by using their website, for example, I think it would have been fine to put in 3 orders and then ask for them to be delivered together. I think that would have been fine. Unfortunately, that's not my life because local authorities. So my life is needlessly complicated for no discernible reason. But I do think that's a great idea when possible. possible, if it is possible in your institution, that is totally a great idea, and I love that. I already try not to order one-off items, though, because delivery costs again.
Yeah.
So I have a constant shopping list on my wall that just gets longer, and eventually when I hit a certain point, I'm like, I'm gonna have to ask permission and then put this in now.
And then it's more difficult because the cost that you're asking for is higher than just 2 scalpel blades.
Yes, so then it becomes more of a sales pitch. So then I have to basically do a business case of, I definitely need these things to do my actual job. Please help. But yeah, that's just my life.
Because that's the other thing about having approved suppliers also, because quite often the same product is sold by a different company.
Yes.
For less money. I have two really great examples of this. One is relating to a handling charge, but I was speaking to another conservator who wanted some pigment. So she went to the normal conservation supplier and it was out of stock. So she looked on the internet, found exactly the same pigment by the manufacturer who was in Europe, and ordered it from them because it was less expensive.
What?
Oh, see, that in some ways that makes sense to me, that getting it straight from the source might be cheaper than getting it from resellers, essentially. Mm-hmm. It will vary vastly, because let's be fair, people like Pell and Conservation Resources, they get their stuff from so many different places that actually it wouldn't be sensible for us to try to track down where they come from originally.
It's a convenience thing rather than a cost thing. And for people who don't...
Yeah, they're a one-stop shop. Like I say, it's the convenience, but things that are easier to source, like a dehumidifier or a blender, which you could buy from Argos.
Yes, which I do.
Or Sainsbury's or wherever.
I go to Wilko a lot.
You are paying for the convenience. Yeah, Wilko's, pound stretchers, they're brilliant. Charity shops.
Yes. Ways that I have sourced equipment include asking a dentist that was closing down, got an ultrasonic cleaner.
What?
Yeah. They weren't interested. They were literally putting in a skip. So I had that. So I have an ultrasonic cleaner. Sometimes just when people refurb or close down, they will give you stuff because they just want to get rid of it, and they're just going to keep paying for skips to be delivered. So sometimes totally worth just approaching people like that.
Yeah, find a friend in the NHS.
Oh yeah, that's also great.
I love how sort of sinister that is, but I don't know why it's sinister.
It isn't. We're not depriving anyone of any stuff, okay?
You're not taking people's prosthetic limbs or anything.
No, it's not that weird.
They're not allowed to sell it because in case you then sue the NHS because it's broken. But there are ways that you can do it legitimately.
Yes.
So find a friend in the NHS or, like you say, the dentists, and buy these things or get them for free.
Yeah.
What are the legitimate ways?
They do have sales.
Oh, I see.
A bit like the police do.
Yeah.
The police?
Yeah, lost and found stuff. So all the bikes that have been handed in.
So yeah,
this is fascinating, guys.
You're welcome. I
hope the listeners are as fascinated as I am.
This is like some black market dealing here. No, it's not.
Well, I'll give you another example. The bench that I work on comes from BHS, British Home Stores, the high street shop, and it's an ex-display cabinet.
Huh.
It's the right height, it's on wheels, it's white, it's melamine, so it's wipe clean, it's metal and plastic. And they were refurbishing the shop. This is before the shop closed, but they were refurbishing the shop. They had the stock outside, they had chairs, they had all sorts of stuff. And I went in and said, could I take the bench? They said yes. And it's the ideal workbench, and it cost me nothing.
And similarly, I got loads of Perspex stands from a shop that was closing down because they were just like desperately giving them away. Because they were just like, but they were just like, look, we're just going to have to bin it otherwise. Like, we don't actually have time to get rid of this in any other way. If you want them, take them. And I took like a whole bag of them. They're shop display stands, but they're acrylic. They're just as good as anything else. Like, that's fine. Yeah. So like that's been a way of sourcing weird display materials.
Ely Museum. This is another thing, is when museums are refurbishing. So I was at Ely Museum recently, and they've just been awarded a Heritage Fund grant to refurbish the museum completely. So they are taking everything off display, everything out of the stalls, and everything, the display materials, the office chairs, the office files, the storage units, are all going.
Oh, it's giving me a bit of anxiety. Sorry. They're just in the ground doing all of that.
Chloe is genuinely paled.
That's amazing. Are there websites and things that, like a museum free cycle?
There is the museum free cycle, but again, I think this is where we need to be more joined up. So it's like us having pieces of equipment, saying we've got this piece of equipment. A leaf caster for me is the big example, because they're very expensive and generally they become a glorified table because they get used so infrequently in a studio.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
But they're a really useful piece of equipment. So again, it's going back to that thing. If you said, look, I've got a leaf caster, if you want to come in and use it, then that's fine. But you have to know it's there before you can ask.
Yes.
And it's the same thing with our museum is only doing a small scale closure, but we've got lots of office chairs. But we're not telling one another so well. I mean, Ely have been good. They've had the office stuff they've been putting outside the museum and the locals have been taking. Like when I was there, they offered me lots of files and I was on the train, I couldn't carry it all. The Museum of London have a clear out a couple of times a year and they advertise that and that's on their website and that's mainly materials rather than equipment.
That's fabulous.
So that'll be paper and Tyvek rolls and all sorts of things like that.
I mean, that's great, and I firmly believe that more people should be doing that. Museum free cycle is quite good. Also, it is nice when people do call outs, so it's worth, if you're working in a particular area, to just keep an eye on like people and places around you, because you never know when there might be a clear out.
I used to work for a national museum and because it was publicly funded, we weren't allowed to sell anything. So things like the data loggers, the thermohygrographs, which were no longer required because we'd gone onto a radio telemetry system, we could have given those to a smaller museum and said, at least you've got some environmental monitoring equipment now, whereas before you had none.
Yeah.
But we weren't allowed to. It had to go into skip because nobody was allowed to profit. And it's absolutely heartbreaking.
It is.
They closed the conservation department down completely and everything went in a skip. However, at that point, I still had friends who worked there, so I have some very nice sable brushes from those skips.
Yeah, I mean... So
now that gives me anxiety as well now.
It is heartbreaking when... Because it's just the immense amount of waste involved in that sort of thing that really upsets me. I do understand the reasoning that went into that decision, but I also fundamentally disagree with it because I think that's stupid. But let's try not to waste. We only got one planet. Come on, share instead. Come on, people.
So let's recap. So we've covered equipment largely, haven't we? That you can.
I just want to point out other great ways of sourcing equipment are things like, so we call them crime converters, which is not what they're actually called. It's pawn shops, like cash converters, cash generator, that sort of thing. Those are great places. I've gotten loads of stuff in there, because it's just used things. So it's, you can get power tools for like £3 because they're just there and they're a bit dinged up, but they still work, and that's a crucial bit. So it's a great place to go for cheap equipment if you do need to buy and you can't borrow. And church shops, like Lorraine said, also really, really good. So sometimes the stuff in there is a £5. Also, IKEA's bargain corner is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
I like the Works. The high street store. I get quite a lot of brushes from there and self-healing cutting mats.
Yes.
I've got an easel that I use to support one of my lights. So I think they're brilliant. And market stalls, I needed some really small pliers, and they were £1 each from a market stall.
I'm a fan of a market stall for small things like that. Yeah, definitely.
Clamps, I got loads of clamps from one.
So as well as the sort of cheaper things you can buy, to recap, we can also contact dentists and certain friends at the NHS and the police, apparently, to recycle the more specific things, I suppose. And then what we're saying is, we need to make efforts for intercommunications with local museums.
And also suppliers, because quite often they have damaged rolls or ended rolls. They're taking up space in the suppliers. So you can, if you contact them, they usually have a room full of half rolls of Tyvek or something that somebody's ordered and haven't wanted and they can't sell because it's a one-off. I get lots of materials like that.
Yeah.
How do suppliers feel about that, though? If you contact them and say, hi, I don't want to spend money on the things, but can I have the things for cheaper if it's in the room of the seconds room? Do they have a problem with that?
I think it depends on the pitch. I mean, sometimes people...
Obviously, I wouldn't. That wouldn't be my
I don't want to spend money, give you... That's not going to go over well. But I mean, like suppliers have limited storage space just like the rest of us.
Right, of course.
So you know how sometimes you might have that one mannequin that's for some reason covered in, I don't know, something terry cloth like, and you definitely don't want to use ever anymore, but someone's desperate for a mannequin and you might just go, just have it because it's taking up space and I need that space for a better mannequin. It might in fact be that sort of thinking, you know, with the suppliers, where it's like, actually I could clear a whole box on that shelf and that means that I have that shelf for something else, that actual stock that will sell. You know what, have it for delivery costs, for example, or something similar. You know, so it might be that you strike a bargain. It might not be free, but it might be heavily discounted, or it might be, you know, pay shipping for it or come and collect it. I you know, and that'll be fine. Always have the conversation. Like the worst thing that's going to happen is to say no.
Buy full price.
How do you open those conversations then, Lorraine?
I have a very good relationship with preservation equipment, and they usually tell me what's in the room and do I want it.
Ooh.
Well, that's nice.
Well, not everyone can schmooze that well, but but that's good to know that you can have that kind of relationship. That's really useful. And, you know, depending on where you are in the world, you might be able to have that with your local supplier, and you might be able to have it with your local art shop, or, you know, you know, something that's useful to you. Yeah,
and I would recommend saying that, you know, I want half a roll of Tyvek in your room of requirements. Do you have one of these? Because it's costing them money. That space that's being used to store stock that they can't sell because it's too difficult for whatever reason, is costing them money. It's better for them to shift it, put something in there that they can sell. Yeah,
but likewise, they don't want to put it in a skip any more than we want to put stuff in a skip.
No, that's true.
You know, things should go to a good home.
So we've started talking about materials now, haven't we? I think my biggest question is, how do we know that things are good enough to use within our guidelines?
Yeah, okay.
If they don't come from the main suppliers and the main agreed locations.
I mean, here you got to use
the right label.
You got to use your judgment here, and it depends vastly on what you're actually trying to do. I suppose. I mean, if something is advertised as acid-free card or paper, you can actually test that because there are pH testing pens, for example, so you can check if that is actually correct when you receive a batch. Like so, like some things you can verify yourself. I'm struggling to think of an example of a material where I would have my doubts that I would actually buy.
I have one.
Yes, go on.
I wanted some adhesive, which is supplied by one of the conservation suppliers, and they are the only supplier for that adhesive. But I only wanted a very small bottle, which was about £8 plus delivery. They wouldn't sell me one £8 bottle. They said they had to put a handling charge on it, which was £30.
What? That's loud. That is somewhat outrageous. Wow.
This particular adhesive, so by the time one £8 bottle from them would have arrived in my studio, it would have cost me £50.
Oof.
So what a lot of companies do is they buy the really large vats of this adhesive and they decant them into smaller bottles. It's exactly the same product.
Yes.
So I went on the internet, found exactly the same product from another supplier who was willing to supply me with one bottle, and it cost me £9.
Yeah, there's an Etsy shop, and I know Etsy is normally for handmade stuff, but that sells some, I want to say, paper conservation supplies, like some conservation supplies in very small quantities. Clearly, this is someone who had bulk order stuff and is then selling off single sheets of stuff, etc. Which I think is a genius idea, because I only need one sheet.
Yeah.
I need an A4 sheet of this material. I do not need a 5-meter roll. There's no way I can afford it. There's no way I want it. And I might not know anyone else in the area who uses that material. So that's how I've gotten small quantities of things sometimes, just by splurging on like a very small Etsy shop from this place. So like I'm eternally grateful to people who do that, because it means that I can have the amount of stuff that I need and want for less. And I'm just eternally grateful to people who do that. Like, that is great.
Let's be specific then. So,
okay,
what can they do then? What can suppliers do? So, are issues like that is obviously issues with costs for delivery versus what they're actually getting to pay for the delivery. Is that because it's new and they haven't set up small quantities deliveries yet? I mean, and
might be that it's hard to talk about this on the basis that I don't really know what the supply chain looks like. Because is it that the actual supplier of, say, the adhesive actually only supplies it in a 5-liter bucket, and the cost-effective way for them to split it up is to supply it in 2-liter containers.
Right.
And then anything beyond that just gets stupid because that's a lot of faff. You got to pay someone to decant all that, and you got to keep it fresh and all that. Is it, in fact, that it just doesn't work in terms of those costs?
Yeah,
because I can see that.
Yeah, definitely.
I was going to say, in this instance, they do actually advertise it in the small quantity that I wanted. So I was actually ordering something that they offer. But if it's not cost effective for them to do that, because obviously they have to go and get that small bottle off the shelf.
Yeah.
They have to wrap it up. It has to go through their systems there to be boxed and sent out for delivery. So if it's not cost effective for them to do it, and if it's a way of deterring people and saying, okay, there's a £30 handling charge, but if you buy more, there will be no handling charge, and they sell more product, then fair enough. At the end of the day, they're a business. They do what they need to do.
Yeah, no, exactly.
But I've definitely made decisions based on, well, it's actually far better to buy loads of it, but I really don't want to have that waste hanging over my head, so I'll stump up to have less, so that I've got more space in my chemicals cabinet.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I also do that because I don't have the option of, say, selling on half of it, because obviously that my employer wouldn't be okay with that. We can't sell the stuff that we buy, if you see what I mean. But I mean, maybe if I was in private practice, I would reconsider that vastly. Maybe I would then like put it in like, I don't know, 200ml bottles and go, look, if anyone else wants one, there is one. Just pay for shipping and like and some of this. Like maybe that's what I would do. I mean, that's actually quite a good idea. Maybe that's what we should all do. But I think it is genuinely, from the big conservation suppliers side, it is probably a thing of it's not cost effective to split it up further.
Yes.
Which is why it's done at grassroots level, if ever.
Yes. And I can understand that if we are using materials, I think we covered this in our hazards episode, that we are using materials very differently in some cases to how they were intended, which obviously has implications on the the health hazards that we may or may not be facing if we're using them differently or in much smaller quantities. So I can imagine if people are selling Lascaux, for example, that's meant to coat, I'm just making this up now, meant to coat like an entire house or whatever, and we're using it to coat a small box, then we're never going to use the amount of
that the supplier thinks
is basing on. So I think the solution is probably in the shape of something like what you're talking about. But I just know that in our fridge we've got the massive Lascaux buckets.
Oh yeah, I mean
you can buy.
Yeah,
and I've worked there for 2.5 years now, and we've barely, using it really regularly. But I mean, you barely get to the middle of it.
Slight tangent, but I already split up the stuff that I buy. So if I buy a big thing of Lascaux, I already split it up 50-50. Yeah, because I work on 2 sites, and I don't want to cart stuff between them because I don't have a car. So it means I have to lug things in my backpack, which is sometimes not even practical. So I just have them on 2 sites, but I can't afford to buy 2 bottles of it because if a bottle of Lascaux is like 40 quid, I'm not spending 80 for the amount that I'm going to use. So actually I will split it, and in fact then I will go to eBay and buy the little chemical containers or similar from China, and then I will decant it into that, and actually that's how I keep my practice rolling, because then I've gotten in 2 places and I haven't spent vastly more money. That just works for me. But it's like tangent on working practices there, but
But when you were saying earlier about ensuring the quality of the material, in terms of things like
that's my main concern.
Yeah, so in terms of adhesives such as gelatin, it's recommended that you go and buy food grade or medical grade. So I know a conservator who did a lot of work around using gels to soften materials that you want to remove, for example, remains of the spines of books. And she recommended using the Dr. Oetker gelatin from Tesco's, because she also wanted something that was easily available to conservators rather than having to go to one specific supplier. And the thing about buying something that's food grade or medical grade is because it's produced for another industry, it's produced in larger quantities and therefore is less expensive.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I do like buying things in like supermarkets and stuff as well. Like that's it just kind of tickles me to go in and buy some gelatin and or some glycerin or something and just be like,
this will never be food.
Yes, this is not for consumption. You mentioned using things in ways that they weren't intended, and I think that's a really interesting one because I think conservators can MacGyver things quite well, and I think but that's like one of our superpowers that we do that.
Definitely.
And I think there are loads of great ways that we can use like everyday things in new ways. Lorraine, do you have any examples?
Well, I wanted a really small humidification chamber. And normally I will make mine I have trays, which I put a Perspex cover over, but they were too big. I wanted something that was much smaller. And in the house, I had an old CD box, which was a really useful box, but just to put CDs in. And it was just the right size and shape. So I used that as the humidification chamber.
Yeah.
Genius. Absolutely genius.
Similarly, someone on Twitter, when we did our tools episode, was talking about how they use a glass butter dish for humidification, really tiny.
And how elegant!
And hilariously, one of my friends got one as a moving in gift, and she did not want it. Then basically, she gave me a butter dish, and now I have a tiny humidification. But
brilliant.
Reuse.
Yeah, Richard Hawkes, recently I put a tweet up this week about using pots, so things like the coffee pots that you can get in the Tiptree jam jars. And I asked about how people use the goo pots. And he fills the bottom with plaster of Paris, allows it to dry, put a drop of acetone or toluene on it, turns it upside down and puts it over the object. And it's a mini solvent chamber to remove tape adhesive.
Oh my God, that's genius.
What?
That is literally what I'm going to do next.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Such a good idea.
Can we start a thing now? I don't know if it could be like an episodely thing, but can we please have Conservation Hacks Corner?
Yes.
Or something where we
send us your best hacks.
This hack for today, this episode
that would be great.
This.
Yes,
can
please.
we do that? That is amazing.
The other thing I have is a piano key from a piano that was gone past being able to use. And so taking off, I have to say, ivory from the key, but it makes an excellent, really thin bone folder or tool to get under and in things. It's one of my most used pieces of equipment.
Oh, love it. I love going to Wagamama because I love their food.
Oh, yeah.
I can't use chopsticks, but they do give you free chopsticks. I always take chopsticks, and I use them as stirrers in my lab, basically indefinitely. And sometimes because they have a certain amount of flex to them, and they actually join together at the top, initially at least, until you break them apart. They act as really long clamps, which are great for some things because they have just the right amount of tension. It is so good. I love Wagamama chopsticks. They are so good.
You ladies are total geniuses. You're geniuses. I feel like I've been working in a purpose-built lab for too long.
Broaden your horizons.
Go to Wagamama's.
Use weird stuff. Let's go to Wagamama.
The other thing that I was introduced to very early on in my career was chlorine board, and it's actually made.
What's that?
As a kitchen work surface. So it's plastic and stone mixed together, granite mixed together to make a very hard surface that really doesn't react to anything. And we have cut to size and used them for flattening objects.
Oh, that's a good idea.
But you can work on top of them. But the thing is, go to your local kitchen fitters and just say, have you got any offcuts of chlorine, please?
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
That is a good idea.
Do you think you could do that with marble and stuff if you wanted weights?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would absolutely say so.
Yes.
Yeah, any industry you think of will have weird offcuts of things. And also, I love a good offcut. I save my plastic offcuts and my foam board offcuts, and I do weird stuff with them. In fact, there's a slight craft project behind me based on foam board offcuts because we're using them to make like little name tags and little signs.
I can confirm she's telling the truth.
For an event. So on the reverse of them, they actually have old interpretation, but the back of them.
Can I have a look?
Yeah.
Hang on, I'm taking off the microphones. What's that?
She's generally leaving the studio table to have a look. But so some of them have stuff on the back. Yeah, but so some of them have like old stories.
The school was built on Blythe Road at the edge of it's torn away village, a large housing estate built by the colliery owners, their employees. Yeah, see, so they're no good for that anymore. But that doesn't mean that they're not good. They're for actually anything. Very elegant. So I'm having loads of fun with that. I love using leftovers. I'm a big hoarder of leftovers.
Yeah, my local takeaway provides the takeaways in plastic containers, which I wash out and I reuse those.
Yes.
Some I just use for storage around the studio. So I've got scalpel blades stored in, and they stack really well.
Yeah. No, I love that sort of stuff. And another one is something I learned recently on a photography course, which was amazing, was that sometimes you get those silvered lids for takeaway containers.
Yeah.
They actually make really good tiny reflectors when you're photographing stuff like coins. So just bounce a little bit of light onto the object so you get a little bit less shadow.
Oh, wow.
And like, that's a stupid thing that I never would have thought of if they hadn't told me about it. And now I use it all the time.
That's so genius.
Because it's just so clever.
I bought some nets for the front of the house, because people will stare in, but they were too long, but they were weighted. So I cut them to length, and I took the weights out of the bottom, and they're little snakes. So I've now got loads of little snakes to weight down my objects.
Beautiful.
Oh, love snake weights.
So I have one final, I suppose, area of our conservation needs to ask about.
Yes, go on.
We've covered materials, we've covered equipment. What about chemicals? What about solvents and things? Because, I mean, I have to admit, I have not, at this point in my career, ever had to order IMS or acetone or anything myself. So I don't know what the normal procedure is. I realise there are suppliers, and I know that there'll be a list in the studio, and I probably should be aware of it already. Sorry, boss. But if you go to that supplier and it's ridiculously expensive, is it worth trying to cut costs with where you go? Is it worth trying to buy some white spirit from somewhere that isn't technically your agreed supplier?
Well, I mean, again, I think it depends on what you use something for, how much you're going to use. I think it's all about context.
Imagine if you had to use it like proper. You had to soak something in it or something. If it was the IMS you were using for all of your conservation needs.
I mean, if you think about it, like some of these things are actually very difficult to get hold of from anyone that isn't like a massive supplier. Yeah. So things that you can get off the high street. I mean, any methylated spirits that's sold in the high street all have dyes in them because you're not supposed to drink them. Yes, that was my understanding, yeah. So in actual fact, those are useless to you.
Okay.
But I think you can get isopropyl alcohol in some shops, actually. You can get deionized water from to use in cars from off the shelf, which I do sometimes if I need to like travel with some. I feel like cheap white spirit, I've not really noticed any difference in terms of quality, but then I have no way of measuring that other than results.
That's my thing, yeah.
So that's a bit trickier, like to gauge, in my opinion. But I'm quite happy to go to Wilco for white spirit because I haven't noticed any difference. But then I very rarely use white spirit anyway, so I suppose I use it very sparingly. Oh, it's a really good question. It really is.
I mean, the only experience I've had of this is years ago. I have on one occasion used 99% acetone that you use for like hardcore false nail removal. I can't really even remember what I think I was dissolving something. I think I was cleaning something or dissolving something, and I used that because I had no other choice. But I was uncomfortable because I was like, what's the 1%, guys? And there was nothing on the label. What do you think?
I was going to say, I don't tend to use a lot of solvents in my work, but I know a metals conservator who is self-employed, and he buys most of his chemicals off the internet. Partly, it's again because of quantity. It's mainly because of quantity. He can't get what he needs. It's also, and I'm not recommending that people start necessarily doing this, but the laws are different in Europe. So he buys a lot when he's in France. It's more easy. It's easier to buy. You can just go into a shop and buy it, which is much more difficult.
That is true. Some chemicals are easier to find in some places than others. And I seem to recall this came up when we did the extreme conservation episode, for example, that in certain places of the world it's easier to get some things than others.
Oh, yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, your mileage will vary, ultimately.
And it's probably all going to change now because...
Well... Yes.
The B word.
The B word.
So the only other thing that I've used as a replacement for IMS is surgical spirit, but I've never used that on the objects. I've only ever used that to clean things like shelves.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that is a way around like cleaning stuff like your tools or something if they're full of gunk. Like you could use a cheaper thing then, for example. Like you don't necessarily have to use the lab grade stuff that should probably be used for objects.
But when I put a tweet out about this and ask for people's ideas and what they do, one of the people that replied said that you shouldn't assume that because it's not recommended as best, it's not good enough. Many adhesives, chemicals, tools and boxes will do the job still meeting conservation standards. So I think the thing is to use your knowledge and your skills, and if you're unsure, to ask somebody else.
Absolutely.
Because again, it all goes back to this thing about sharing the knowledge. Somebody might have bought a bottle of acetone off the internet, which was brilliant, but we don't tell one another because we just assume everybody knows, or they won't be interested.
Yeah, or in fact, there's stigma attached to it because you bought it from a different supplier. Maybe people will somehow take offense or think that you're not doing your job properly, etc. So I think there's also a certain amount of like social stigma attached to it, much like buying Asda Smart Price is associated with stigma for some people. Something that did occur to me as you were talking about solvents was that early this year I learned some gilding skills. And the conservator who was training us, she'd extensively tried different kinds of alcohol that were useful during the gilding process. And the cheapest kind of gin that you can buy is, in fact, really, really useful during gilding.
Yeah.
So I went to Tesco and got Tesco's own gin, and people really questioned my sanity when I came back with that.
So what is... I mean, that fascinates me because I've also heard, I think, a field archaeological conservator saying, like, oh, and if you're in a pinch, you can just buy cheap vodka and that will do for your IMS.
Yes, I've heard that from several people as well.
What's in commercial? What's in a gin or in a vodka that isn't alcohol? Because I don't drink either of these things, and they just both taste like death to me. So.
I feel like I'm not well versed enough in alcohol culture to actually be able to answer that question, but I'm sure a listener can.
What are your contaminants there? Like my question of
presumably
what are my contaminants?
There must be some sugar
acetone?
in there, for example. But I guess it's also a question of, for example, if you're stuck with some vodka, it's because you have nothing else.
Yes,
you cannot get anything else. It isn't. So I always go for the vodka. I think there's a very big difference there, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. I can see that now.
Yes. Basically, I think there are loads of ways of being thrifty, and there are loads of ways of basically making your money go further for you. And a lot of it is by shopping around or thinking outside the box. Mm-hmm. And yeah.
Do you want to list some of the other things that you will be covering in your training?
So it seems like making your own.
Oh, we haven't covered that. Oh. Okay.
She's so excited now.
Little things, tips around how you're working in your studio, where we started off with assessing your costs as your first step. And then the second one for me after that would be ensuring that your resources, you know what you've got, so that you've got them well stored and easy to access. So, I mean, I'm sure we're all guilty of it. You can't find something, or you think you bought it, but you don't know where it is, or you think you've run out of it, or you don't even know you've got it because you bought it so many years ago.
Yeah.
And you order another one. And then 2 days later, you find the one you bought 14 years ago. So, so you're not duplicating, because that clearly is a waste of money. And there's a lot of internet resources. I mean, apps, a brilliant app to turn your mobile phone into a thermal imaging camera. We did the Be Inventive. There's lots of cheap and cheerful solutions. We're working together, working with students and volunteers, looking for less expensive suppliers and shopping around.
Well, hey, something else that I was thinking about sharing, because if we're trying to pull resources, then something that is massively expensive and sometimes absolutely impossible is books. The literature and conservation is very expensive. There's a thing that I would love if there could be reference libraries that we all shared. Like,
yes, please.
I mean, they would probably have to be physical on the basis that loads of these things are out of print and they're not available in any other format, etc. Yes, exactly. Oh, books are so expensive. Sometimes hundreds of pounds. It's insane.
Yeah.
So
I've been trying to get hold of the Selwyn.
Good luck, because that's one I would love.
£300?
They are out of print. I would love one, but it is never going to happen. Ever.
Yeah, well, maybe a book loaning, can we do like a conservation library where people loan books? And
I think there would have to be loads of little ones like dotted about, but I mean, some people might actually genuinely have these books lying around and they don't use them very often. It would be good if we could pool them in one place. Or like a couple of hubs. That would be amazing. Mm-hmm. Much like the equipment. That would be really good crossover to have books and equipment. Mm-hmm.
So again, you have to know what people have got.
Yes. That is the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I have lots of books on photographic conservation, which I would be quite happy to let other people use.
Yeah.
But, of course, they don't know they're here. They don't know what titles I've got.
Exactly. So, yeah, maybe we need to find ways of better sharing these sorts of things and figuring out where they are and plot them on a map or something. I don't know. I don't know, something. Something should definitely be done here because...
Well, it goes back to the technology, doesn't it?
Yes.
Because the technology can do this for us.
Yeah. Oh, loads of good ideas, guys.
Yeah.
And if you guys have more ideas listening, then please let us know via Twitter or email or anything that you want to do, because we'd love to hear from you. Well, thank you so much, Lorraine. That was super helpful.
Thank you.
And,
you're very welcome.
And good luck with the course. Can't wait to hear how it went. And for anyone who's interested in pooling resources in any shape, way or form, please do get in touch with Lorraine, because she would love to hear from you. If you want to share equipment or books or supplies, if you want to do anything like that, she would love to hear from you. We'll pop her contact details in the show notes.
Hi C Word listeners, I'm Christina Rizek, an objects conservator from Cambridgeshire, and I've asked Jenny to include this message in the first episode of this season. I'm really sorry I couldn't make the recordings for the first 2 episodes of this season, but life got in the way on the recording day, and so there are a couple of other things I wanted to say, really. I wanted to record a message for this first episode of Season 6 to explain that from now on I'm going to be taking more of a backseat this season. I'll still be involved, and I've identified 3 or 4 episodes that I'll be co-hosting and whose topics I'm really excited about. But I just don't have enough time to spare to do more than that at the moment. As I said in Belfast, for anyone who was at our talk or listened to the podcast afterwards, I really love doing interviews, so I hope that I'll be able to keep doing those, and do get in touch if you want to talk to me about something. Another more personal reason that I wanted to step back a bit at the moment is that I have once again taken a job outside conservation. This was partly for practical reasons. I've always been upfront about the fact that it can be really difficult to find conservation jobs that work with my family life, especially now that my children are 6 and 8 years old. But it was also for my own sanity, actually. I've been doing conservation in one way or another for about 15 years now, and I have a real love-hate relationship with conservation and with the profession, I would say, at the moment. And as I've got more experienced as a conservator, I found it harder to find work that satisfies and challenges me as much as my first couple of jobs did. So I've taken a non-conservation job that pays the bills and gives me all the practical and intellectual challenges that I could want, and more. And hopefully that will free up a bit of time, as I said in Belfast, to do just the fun bits of conservation so that I can fall in love with it again. Or at least that's the plan. And ironically, in fact, my decision to move away from conservation has coincided with several invitations to get involved in interesting conservation projects, and I always find it impossible to say no, so I've said yes to all of them, which might be a disaster. I've never been more popular. So I'm going to try and combine the day job with these interesting sidelines and see where that takes me. And no doubt they'll form the basis for another episode or 2 of the C Word, so I'm sure that is not the last you've heard from me on that. I'm really gutted that I can't spend more time on this podcast at the moment, but I know it's the right thing to do. Each hour of content easily takes the 3 of us 30 or 40 times that long to record and produce and edit. It's been an absolute blast so far doing this podcast. I've learnt so many new things and spoken to so many fabulous and fascinating people, but I want to leave before it starts to become a drag rather than a blast. And also, by freeing up a hosting slot, by not recording so often, I really hope that there will be room to have many more of these diverse and interesting voices on the show. Seriously, guys, if you fancy being a co-host for an episode, drop us an email at thecwordpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to have you. And Jenny and Kloe are lovely, lovely people and won't bite. And I just want to say a massive thank you to those two who have become brilliant friends and allies and co-conspirators since we've started doing the C Word together. I love you both so much, and I couldn't wish for better and more fun co-hosts. I know the podcast is totally safe in Jenny and Kloe's hands, but I'll still be back from time to time. So see you all later this season.
Magnetic Mounting Systems for Museums and Cultural Institutions by Gwen Spicer. The first 4 chapters cover information on magnets. I find this a brilliantly practical form of introduction to a book of this sort. I've definitely skipped introduction chapters to practical books in the past because, while theory and history are very valuable, as a dyslexic person, what I read has to be worth the effort it takes me and relevant to the job at hand. In this case, mounting an object for display, the theory and history presented in Chapter 1 is consistently presented and practically relevant. That's not to say there isn't a good amount of history presented here, but it's neatly presented in, drumroll, a single table. So you only need to delve deep if you really want to. Overleaf, I find a section that is not relevant to object mounting with magnets, a historical note page about the development of compasses. Instead of being an interruption, however, it has the "did you know?" brief digression of an interesting conversation, separated from the text for the focused reader, but provided for additional intellectual richness and a relaxed, engaging nature that characterises the whole book. The science kicks in Chapter 2, and here I'm particularly grateful for the frequent yellow boxes including the explanations of the meanings of words. I love a glossary of terms section, but for immediate understanding of a hurried reader, having them present on the relevant page really increases the usability of the book. Amidst the science, we still have figure image examples of magnetic mounting systems. And how great is this sentence? This mount design has been in place since 1991 with no ill effect. That's such a great practical addition. It doesn't guarantee success, but it's exactly what we need to know when starting a new display. Skipping past more tables of science history, I'm distracted by neodymium magnets and my realization that I didn't even know there were different types. Factors such as corrosion tendencies, another thing I hadn't considered, and the ideal coatings for different uses and environmental conditions are again presented in an accessible table. Powering through my distraction, I will linger on Chapter 3, Components of a Magnetic System for Use in Museums. There is some more in-depth science in this chapter, and if you're interested in this, then you will find out about the factors relevant to magnet use, causes behind these things, and the ways that they can be used to our advantage, and the ways that they can cause us problems. If you're not into the science, you don't need to be, as there's only a few more pages of science and related diagrams before we get to discussions of materials and their uses. It's definitely worth persevering with the science, though. It's clearly and visibly explained and well illustrated, and as the author says on page 47, only through controlling all variables, the magnet, the ferromagnetic materials, and the layers in between, that a magnetic system can be reproduced and adapted. We lean gradually more and more towards practical concerns as we move through Chapter 4, Types of Magnetic Systems, and the case studies begin in earnest. My personal learning style is very practical, so it's here that I'm finally cottoning on to the huge potential of magnets in museums. This chapter is full of helpful tips, hacks, and things to bear in mind while developing your own system. Even considerations such as where to buy different materials. In a book focused on magnets, I've really appreciated Chapter 6, the behaviour of gap materials, or, in other words, the non-magnetic mounting materials in a magnetic system. You won't be surprised to hear that a lot of detail is covered here. And I would find this summary of options such as friction, static charge, slope, and so on, useful even if I wasn't considering using magnets. And I'd like to take a moment to celebrate the subheading, What does this all mean? And the associated recap of key factors that have been covered. And another summary table. We're in deep with the practical discussions now, from the visitor experience of an object mount to considerations of potential additions to objects, and with what adhesives. I have a big fondness for publications that include questions. It opens discussions to the community, rather than attempting to be a closed-off and superior instruction manual. Past more case studies, system diagrams, and discussions on materials, we come to Chapter 8, Useful Tools when Working with Magnets, which includes tips on how to assess the properties of a magnet, as well as considerations of the tools that allow maximum flexibility with creating systems. Some of these things may be seen as rather obvious, such as avoiding magnetic materials, or workspaces, and removing jewellery. But it's these things that allow us to feel we can properly get stuck in and overcome factors that seem irritating or time-consuming. Another thing I appreciate about this book is that it often recaps information, and it's clear that the author assumes and accepts that people will often not read it cover to cover, but with simple recaps, it's still possible to learn a lot from this book. We rarely have time to research, experiment, and test as much as we would like to, and this is probably how some people will feel about Chapter 9, Testing a Magnetic System. But with the case studies at the end of the book and the included references to previous publications, many conservators will be able to create something safe and elegant, even if we don't have the 2 weeks, but only 2 hours or less than, to mount an object. If you can afford the time to conduct the ideal testing, however, all the information is included here. Something that keeps occurring to me as I read this book is that I'm not asking myself, is X included in the book? Instead, I'm thinking, I hadn't even considered this factor enough to check whether it's been included in the book. Chapter 11 and Travelling with Magnets is one example. It covers shipping them by different methods and for different reasons, such as with an object for a loan display, or with an object for the purpose of mounting, or with an object for the purpose of securing for storage during transit. Although reading about all the objects one can mount with magnets is fascinating and inspiring, almost more interesting to me is Chapter 13, the effect of magnets on collections that are ferromagnetic, or in other words, stuff you can't use magnets with. Although this chapter may not all be inspiring diagrams and ideas like the rest of the book, by discussing each collection and the related limitations with magnets, it shows us why not, and the things that can be allowed as well as avoided. And now for the case study section. This is a nearly 100-page section that some of us will already have turned to. Others will work up to it from the beginning. Either way, I feel the reader will find this useful, as a huge variety of object types and display solutions have been covered. Of the 100 pages, each case study covers 1 page. For scientific ease of use, each one is laid out in the same way and presenting the same information in a table format. The authors, object type, the type of display, the magnet type, the covering, the slope, the gap materials, the structural support, and the method of securing the materials, plus, of course, a nice diagram and project summary. These are all included in each page table. Not only does this provide a lot of information, but in my opinion, it makes the design of one's own system seem more straightforward and manageable, as if it can be summarised and explained so neatly, it can't be that complicated. As it can be summarised and explained so neatly. As you'd expect, this is a great addition to the book, and a great way to finish the main body of it. Following this, at the end of the book, we have appendices, a healthy glossary of terms, and a long bibliography. So here are my final thoughts. In reading this book, I've discovered that I massively underestimated the depth and complexity of magnetic mounting, as well as its huge capacity for careful adaptation and nuance. Magnets can be in front, behind, and within objects, large area supports, or localized. But this is complexity in a good way, and by producing this book, Gwen Spicer has introduced the wider conservation community to these methods, and in an accessible format. We can now develop and grow and see what we can achieve with it. This isn't an instruction manual for a quick glance, to be told what to do. It's worth spending time with this book to familiarise yourself with the theory, options, and practical examples, to really be able to make creative decisions. While this might take longer than a set of instructions, we all know the benefits of this way of working, for a varied collection particularly. Some might say there's too much science included, but personally my feeling is that this book provides all the information. It's up to the reader to decide what they need to take away from it to achieve their own goals. And if you're anything like me, you'll find yourself happily reading through the science, history, and practical issues alike, and we'll all be experts on magnetic mounting systems before we know it.
If you're enjoying the C Word and would like to support our work, then please consider becoming one of our patrons. For as little as $1 per month, you can help us keep our episodes online and more of them coming. Patreon helps us meet our regular costs for the show, and also to plan ahead so we know roughly how much of a monthly budget we've got. That's super helpful when you're trying to do something special like buy a better microphone or save up to go to a special event. Your support also helps keep us free of advertisement. In return, our supporters get access to our archive of extended episodes, which you can only access on our Patreon page. Yeah, for that $1 a month, you get a little extra audio enjoyment. We've crunched the numbers, and it's about 10% extra content on a regular basis. Well, that's not bad for less than a cup of coffee, eh? If supporting us sounds like something you'd like to do, then head over to patreon.com/thecword and join our bunch of absolute champions. Patreon shout out! Thank you so much to the new people who joined us in between seasons. So a warm welcome to Magali, Conserve, and Tine. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening. We're The C Word, and you've been listening to Lorraine Finch, Kloe Rumsey, and me, Jenny Mathiasson. Join us next time for an episode about archival collections. In the meantime, check out our website at thecword.show, tweet us at The C Word Podcast, or simply email us on thecwordpodcast@gmail.com. The intro and outro music is Spring by Didi Music and used under Creative Commons Attribution License. Additional music and sound effects by Callum Robertson. This has been a Wooden Dice production.